Coming up on tonight's episode of Faith versus Culture, another school shooting. But are guns really the key problem here? We're going to dive into that and more coming up next.
To have a sex before you marry is a bad idea.
Don't tell me there's no such thing as gun violence.
That just depends on your definition of when life begins.
There are problems of sin and habit that cannot be solved outside the person of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of Faith versus Culture right here on the CBN News Channel. My name is Dan Andros. I'm the managing editor of CBN's FaithWire.com. As always, with Billy Hallowell, also of FaithWire. We're going to be joined in a few minutes here by Evan Todd, who is a school safety advocate and a survivor of Columbine. And so we'll be bringing him in here in a couple of minutes. But Billy, I wanted to start off. We've had another one of these school shootings. It just seems like every so often this happens. And the same old conversations around guns keep popping up around it. Very little given to the heart issue. And so as Christians, of course, we're going to take a look at that tonight. But man, this latest case, it's even different, I think, than some of the other shootings that we've seen.
Yeah, it has a very different feel to it. And again, a lot of the details are going to unfold as the case unfolds, right? But what we're seeing is you've got a kid going into a school, allegedly, the particular person who's been accused of this, he killed 4 people. There are a number of others who were injured. And you have some details that are coming out that seem a little confusing surrounding the family, his family, and the parents, charges being announced against the parents, which is not something that you see very often in these cases. And so, yeah, we're going to have to keep sort of monitoring that to see where it goes. But it does have a very different feel to it.
Yeah, and at least 4 have died. And one of those students was one of the football players on the team. And there are accounts that he heroically tried to disarm the shooter when he just happened upon the scene of, seeing this young man opening fire and tried to disarm him and was mortally wounded in the process. So definitely heroic actions there. So tragic all around, but you see these parents and there's a lot of question marks there because charges were filed, and that is very unusual. I mean, you just don't see that sort of thing in this case. I mean, maybe at most you see some negligence charges because they left a gun out or didn't lock it or something like that. But to get involuntary manslaughter, I mean, something else is going on here.
Yeah, and the other factor that's really interesting about this case is that it involves a handgun, right? And you don't often see when there's a school shooting, it seems, and I'm sure there are examples out there, but you're not really talking about handguns. You're talking about other types of guns, and that opens up all sorts of different confusing conversations. And we were even talking about this earlier, semi-automatic handgun, right? Well, there aren't many other types of handguns, right? The way that the media frames it creates some confusion too, but the type of gun used is another factor in this that seems a little different.
Yeah, and we're going to dive into this as the conversation progresses. But the frustrating thing to me, again, as a Christian, when I see the conversation immediately go to the method, to the, to the actual thing that was used to carry out an act of violence. That's what the conversation surrounds, and it very rarely or very minimally focuses on what's underneath, what is simmering, what caused that behavior. And this is something that my wife and I focus on as parents all the time. Like when you're looking at your kids and the things they're doing, there's 2 ways you can approach it. One, you can just be just working to change their behaviors, or you can change their heart. What is it that's driving at this behavior? What is it lurking underneath that's making them act out, that's making them want to be angry, and or whatever the case may be, fight with their brother or sister, all the things that happen when you're trying to parent. So, but that conversation doesn't seem to happen, and that's one I think that's sorely missing today in society, especially when we see all these things going on.
Yeah, well, people want quick answers to things. We live, I can go on my phone and order something, and Amazon's going to deliver it to me in a day, probably not even 2 days anymore. And so that's what we seem to want in our culture right now. And nobody is talking about the fact, if you take that gun away, if you take a knife away, if you take the weapon away, the internal feeling, which is not a normal feeling, that you should harm someone is still there, right? What created that act, what led to that act is still within that person. So you're 100% right. That's what we need to be talking about.
Yeah. All right. Let's bring in Evan Todd now. Evan, who, as I said at the top of the show, is a school safety advocate now and survived the Columbine shooting, which was probably the first one like what we've seen now play out several times in the 2 decades plus since. So, Evan, appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, why don't you give us a little bit about just, I'm sure you've told this story a bunch of times, but, maybe just give us the, the Cliff Notes version of what you went through. There's been whole books and series written on it because obviously that is a huge event that you went through, but let's see if you can sum it up for the people who maybe haven't heard.
Yeah, I was 15 years old. I was a student at Columbine, sophomore. I was in the library, and I was one of the first students shot in the library, and was in there for the 7 or 8 minutes that they went around, the 2 murderers, and executed my classmates, shot at random, and eventually came back around to where I was at, put guns to my head, asked if they should kill me, and I talked them out of murdering me, and I was the last one to speak with them before they took their own lives. So it was a pretty horrific experience that sent me down a road that unfortunately leads me to where I am today, advocating for school safety and trying to change the hearts and minds of individuals across the world, quite frankly.
Yeah, Evan, there's so many things about your story, and you and I have known each other since a little bit after Columbine, actually. For about 20 years, we've known each other. And, I've heard your story many times, and thinking through what you just described, which, you gave a very concise series of events that you went through. How did you move forward from there? I think it's important that we sort of talk about that, because you are a strong person of faith. You're a person whose faith I've never known it to be rocked. How were you able to rebuild and pick up the pieces after going through that?
It's been obviously a long road, and there's been some ups and downs, and my faith has played a role from day one. Absolutely. And that's another thing that I think really helped, empowered, and encouraged me from the beginning was the thoughts and prayers, the outpouring of love from throughout the world that really lifted me up in the aftermath. And, I know there's been debates over that because of political reasons over the years, but I really did. I felt it, and I saw miracles in my life from those prayers. And so that was really, I think, the beginning. And then, there were tough times. I was questioning a lot of aspects of life, politics, and being able to have a place that I could turn to in my faith, to the Bible, and look into scriptures and trying to find answers. All of that has really helped and shaped me over the last 20 years, for sure.
Yeah, and the Michigan case, I would imagine, these cases keep happening again and again and again, right? And a lot of the work that you've done, when you go out and you talk about these things, when you do appearances like this, your goal is to not see these things ever happen again. But one of the painful things, as we know, since Columbine really woke so many people up to the problems that we have, spiritually, and the heart problems we have in this country, these events have happened again. What is it like to see an event like Michigan unfold? What goes through your heart and your mind?
It's a rush of emotions. I do remember back to when I was experiencing it, what it felt like, the adrenaline, the fear, the unknowing, of hearing those gunshots, feeling helpless. hearing others scream and cry out in pain. So I have that emotion running through me, and then it's also maddening to see it happening again, because I think it's clearly we are failing as a society to prevent and stop these. And I think we can do better on both sides of preventing and physically stopping them. And so it is, it's frustrating. And so that's why I think it's why I continue to do what I do. And I will until things change.
All right, well, I want to take a break here just for a minute, and we'll come back on the other side. And I want to dive further into this and about the conversations. As I mentioned at the top, the conversation often shifts right into that, where it's the thing that they're using. It's the gun. It's, whatever the weapon is that's used. And that always ends up being the focus. And so we want to talk and get beneath that and find out the answer to that question. Is it really the guns, or is there more? What else can we be talking about? We'll dive into that and more coming up on the other side of the break. This is Faith versus Culture. Okay, we're back here on Faith versus Culture. Dan Andros here, Billy Hallowell there. We're also joined by Evan Todd, who is a survivor of Columbine. We're talking about another one of these horrific school shootings that have happened here in Michigan, and just a really tragic scene that has unfolded there. And Evan, we're talking to you, and you've been advocating for this school safety for 20 plus years now. And so where do you see the holes in the conversation? We're talking about, that it always just goes right to guns, and that it doesn't talk about heart issues. It doesn't talk about some of these safety measures that you've been advocating to put in. So where do you see as the holes in the conversations in the aftermath of these shootings?
Yeah, and I really look at it through the lens. This is a cancer. This is a cancer in our culture. And just like cancer, there's a way to prevent it and there's a way to treat it. And I think we could do better at both. On the preventative side, it is the heart. It is, raising better children, doing better in society, having better schools. And we can talk about that as well. And we should. And then on the flip side, there's the treatment. When these things happen, we need to be able to respond with them quickly and violently. And that means to have someone in the school who can physically stop someone who is shooting innocent children. If that's a resource officer, I, for one, am a huge proponent for armed staff, school teachers, administrators. It's something that I have advocated for years, and it's something that's been very successful. There's over 1,000 schools across the country that have had armed staff for over the last 20 years, and there have been zero incidences, from school shootings to accidental discharge, nothing. There's been zero incidents, no one hurt. And this is a proven strategy. It's a proven deterrent. And not only that, just in this case, we saw from the sheriff that during a press conference, he talked about how the school resource officer wasn't even at the school at the time because he covers multiple schools. He was at a middle school, I believe. He was one of the ones that, it sounds like, apprehended the suspect, so he got there very quickly. But within that time frame of not being at the school and him responding, 4 kids died, and many others were wounded. And so that's not acceptable. And that's a hole in the physical safety of schools that I think communities, parents should look at. If there's a school's resource officer, is that really enough? And I don't believe it is. I think that partnership between school staff who's armed and law enforcement makes for even better situation to protect our schools.
I want to talk more about the heart issue, but I want to just go back to something you just said, because one of the critiques you'll often hear, and I'd love, and you spoke to it, you said there have been no incidents in which violence has unfolded when people are armed. There's this fear that some people have who don't really understand the issue that, well, how could a teacher handle this? Or you can't just give guns to these people. What goes into preparing you talked about training, just to kind of put people's minds at ease so they understand the process that these educators go through to be able to have a gun in a school.
Yeah, I've met countless teachers just here in Colorado who carry concealed in some of the approved schools in Colorado. These are, we're talking about teachers, some of the, this is the cream of the crop. These are the people who we trust our children with every day. These aren't, I think there's a misconception or a Hollywood view that's been played out in people's minds that this is dangerous. But these are people who are ex-military, law enforcement, or gun enthusiasts. They've been, they don't just go pick up a gun and throw it in their waistband. These are people who take their rights very seriously. They take their ownership very seriously. They practice. And not only that, here in Colorado, there's an organization called Faster Colorado that trains these teachers, and they go through the same qualification that law enforcement does. So they go through training, they qualify on a range, they go through scenario tactics, shoot, no shoot, de-escalation, all kinds of different things. These are very responsible people, and a lot of these teachers who are carrying now, like I said, they don't just pick it up. They have been carrying everywhere else. They carry to church. They carry on the weekends. They're carrying concealed legally. But when school starts, they used to have to disarm themselves to go to school. And so there is a specific law in Colorado that allows this to happen, where teachers can be trained, approved, and carry in schools. And it does vary from state to state, but it's something that I think we need to see a lot more of, and recruit these teachers who are law-abiding gun owners, who do have the training, who do have the mindset, who want to protect their children, their fellow faculty and administrators. So,
yeah, and it's interesting because one of the common patterns that you see in most of these shootings are soft targets. That's my sense of things. Maybe I'm wrong, Evan. You've been looking into this, but it sure seems like if you make yourself the soft target, you're just opening yourself up for this potential.
Well, and your intuition is absolutely correct. 90% of the school shooting mass murders happen on gun-free zones. There's a few of these mass murders that have happened at churches and other that go into the other 10% that aren't technically gun-free zones. But yeah, 90% of them happen in those soft target areas. And not only that, if you even just look at it from a political standpoint, you look at Detroit, California, New York, the places that have the highest victimization from gun violence are places that are soft targets where good people have been disarmed from bad gun laws. And so it is the soft targets. All these gun laws that have been pushed are essentially just creating more victims. They're not creating any more safety.
What is it that has changed inside? We talk about faith and culture. What has changed inside the American heart? What is happening in this country that we have such a rash of these kinds of events? And it's not just mass shootings. You just mentioned, look at our cities, what we're seeing happen. I can't tell you how many things we've covered where it's like this city is reaching, the highest level of homicides, handgun homicides they've had ever, right, this year. So we're seeing this rash of violence. But what has changed in our hearts that has led to that?
Well, yeah, this is the huge one, because a lot has changed, over the last, I think, 150 years. And that's everything from our respect for life, I think is one huge point. The two murders at Columbine had zero regard for human life. Anyone who does this has zero regard for human life. And I think that's a conditioned response from that they've learned through society, their teachings, their disconnect with God. On top of that, I think we've been separated from God, and I think through a myth. You hear that, like, for instance, church and state, the separation of church and state, which I think is a myth, but that has played out and people have accepted it. And they, our schools have been separated from church. And I think what that has actually done is separated children from church. We have these godless schools, and I think there's a spiritual war going on within our schools.
Amen to that. Hey, we got to take a break here real quick. I want to continue this conversation on the other side. We will be right back after this. All right, we are back here on Faith versus Culture. Got time for one more segment here with Evan Todd, who survived Columbine. And Evan, I wanted to just have you leave people, especially those who maybe just went through this shooting or one before that and survived it like you. What would you say to encourage them, in particular, in their faith walk?
Yeah, just know that I'm joining with, I think, millions of people across the country, the world, who are praying for you, that you do find comfort and peace. And, this is a difficult time. And one thing I learned, that no difficult times really last. And so what you are going through will not last. You will find more joy and peace and happiness in life. And there are answers, and there are people who are there to help you. So don't bottle it up. Don't separate yourself. One of the best things I did was open up and talk to people and reach out. And I found a lot of support and comfort from doing that. So just know that we're praying for you.
Awesome. Really great words. Appreciate it. Appreciate your time and you stopping by and spending a few minutes here with us today on Faith versus Culture.
Thanks, Evan.
Thanks for having me.
All right, that is all we have for this episode of Faith versus Culture. As always, we're so thankful you're here and you chose to spend a few minutes with us as we talk about the issues of our day that impact us in faith and, of course, in culture, and try to give you a Christian response to that, try to let you see things and let you see the world through the eyes of a Christian lens, and so to help you with your walk as you're going forward. And as always, we'll be praying for you and your week going forward, and we hope it's a great one. So God bless, and we'll see you next time.